Okay, so welcome everyone to Regain's office hours. I'm Tracy Bulandi, and I'm a program associate with the Wallace Center on the Ray team and the Pasture Project. And today you're joining us for our Regain Technical Expert office hours. And just a little background on Regain, it is the Regenerative Ag Idea Network, which is a partner and member-driven online community of practice that's really designed to help different agricultural educators and advocates and leaders have a shared space to discuss resources and expertise and promote events. And we hold these office hours every fourth Wednesday of the month. And they're just a chance for discussion where people can learn about different technical experts on Regain and Regain member organizations and how that relates to their work and expertise. So we have technical expert office hours, which are every fourth Wednesday of the month at 12 p.m. Central. And we also have organizational spotlight office hours, which are every second Wednesday of the month at 12 p.m. Central also. And just to let you know, upcoming on April 28th, Marshall Johnson with the National Audubon Society Conservation Ranching Initiative will be presenting. And I'll share all the links and information if you need to get in touch with me on any questions you might have or would like to learn more about how you could participate in office hours. But I would like to also introduce our speaker today. It is Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, who is the CEO and founder of ECDYSIS Foundation. And with that, oh, also, I just want to quickly mention that as you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, and towards the end of the meeting, we'll open up for discussion. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to John to take it away with this presentation.
All right, thank you, Tracy. I'm going to share my screen here. Well, we have a pretty small group. Let me see if I've got the right one. Not quite yet. There it is. I have a pretty small group. Let's keep it informal. You guys can interrupt as you need to. So I'm John Lundgren. Yeah, can you guys all see the screen okay? I'll assume that you can. You'll let me know if you can't. Looks like it's coming up here. Not sure. There it is. Okay. I run an organization out of South Dakota called ECDYSIS Foundation. In addition to being a scientist, our goal here at ECDYSIS is to be the scientific infrastructure to help fuel a large-scale change to our food system and to provide the scientific input needed to help regenerative agriculture kind of take off. So on one level, we're kind of trying to change or to offer scientific support, but also we're trying to change how science is done within these applied fields because I think that that's a really needed thing. Right now, science is kind of hell-bent on helping give incremental changes to the current system. And what we need is a little bit different approach to thinking about how to change science on a grander scale. Something to bear in mind with this whole idea of regenerative farming is that farmers are leading the charge. They're kind of head and shoulders faster than then science is responding to that. And so really meeting these farmers and seeing the potential of what is possible within a farming operation, a lot of times these folks were doing things that science said can't happen on their farms. And so it was a very humbling experience to kind of meet these folks and show or see that there was a better way. And so I've had to personally become go back to the learning desk and and trying to figure out exactly what it is that these guys are doing and how to make it scalable and transferable to everybody that's out there. So as a scientist, geez, I want to say it's almost 10 years now. We got a grant to study cover crops. Regenerative agriculture wasn't a thing back then. Study cover crops and corn and how they might be affecting, invertebrates and things like that. And so we got this grant to study that. And so we were the experts, right? And we went out to farmers and we said, okay, you guys are the leaders within the farming community. Do you want to participate in this cover crop experiment where we show that cover crops can really be an important aspect in management of corn? He said, sure, yeah, we'd love that. And so, oh, great. So what you got to do is you need 4 plots. Each of these have to be 40 feet by 40 feet. And half of them need to be untreated without covers. They're just bare soil. The other 40, they need to be planted with a cover crop. And the farmers were like, well, that's great. But how do we kill the cover crop? What species do we plant? My fields are never bare soil. Why would I maintain that? So can we plant the bare soil within the cover cropped fields? What variety of corn should we be planting? It was throughout the region. And so I dictated all of these things. And what I realized is by doing so, I lost what was special about those farms to begin with. And that ushered in a whole new approach to science for our team. That culminated, 2015, 2016, 2017, right in that area. Claire LeCan joined our team. She was a master's student. And she essentially knitted together, or rather put the icing on the cake, really, of all that corn work that we'd been doing over the last 10 years or so. What she did was very simple, right? She said, and at the time, regenerative, even then, was just in its nascency. This is the first scientific publication that was ever published on peer-reviewed, or rather on primary scientific research in regenerative farming. What she did that was so special is she found the leaders in regenerative. And we went to in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska. And pointed us, she said, point us to the corn phase of your rotation. And they did so. And so we studied that. And then she said, okay, point us at the conventional neighbors who are doing things well and being very successful with that. And we did that and went out and sampled those fields too. And so this was a pretty special study. It was best management practices as defined by farmers, not by scientists. It was a regional focus and it was system level. Okay. So within regen, practices vary, principles do not. So practices on these farms to attain that successful corn crop were different in these, even within each treatment, the regenerative and conventional treatment. But what was different is the practices that were employed, but there were a couple of practices that were consistent. None of the regenerative operations used insecticides. Okay. And all of the conventional cornfields had used in BT corn hybrids and neonicotinoid seed treatments. So, full bioinventory of the corn community. We conducted that. So we looked at all of the insects on the plants, we looked at all the insects on the soil surface, and then we looked down inside of the soil column and to see what kind of invertebrates were living down there. And we also looked at yields and profits in each of these cornfields. And this is what we found. The insecticide-treated cornfields had 10 times more insect pests than the ones that had never seen insecticides. And the reason behind this was because these regen folks didn't just drop insecticides, they replaced it. And they replaced it with diversity, plants, cover crops, things like that. But when they did so, they revealed a critical flaw in our thinking on traditional, conventional agriculture, that pests are inevitable. Pests are not inevitable. Pests are a symptom. They are never the problem. Solve the problems. Profits were twice as high in the regenerative operations. And that wasn't, that wasn't related to yields. They weren't doubling in profit. In fact, the regenerative cornfields actually produced a little less yield. When we looked at the profitability of each field, it was not correlated with yield at all. You want to know what it was correlated with? How much soil organic matter they had produced on their farm. What that says is that this is a good business decision. That conserving life on your farm, that conserving soil on your farm, be it rangelands, be it croplands, be it orchards, whatever, is a good investment. We went out to California almonds. ECDYSIS works all over the country, and we've got active projects in, I don't know, probably up to a dozen states now. When I went out, I became a beekeeper. I became a farmer about 6 years ago. And to do that, I followed the bees. Most of the nation's bees goes out to the Central Valley of California to pollinate the almond orchards. And when they arrive, this is what they land in. Absolutely, yes. This was a wetland. This was one of the most fertile areas of the country, and has been desertified through our soil management practices. Okay. Anything that I'm doing to try to save the bees up in the Midwest is completely negated when those bees go out west to the California orchards. Tommy came on board, and he's a master's student, just finishing up now, and asked me for a project. I said, well, this one looks like it'd be pretty straightforward, a hell of a lot of work, but it's straightforward. Find some regenerative almond orchards and find some conventional orchards. And let's compare these two from a systems perspective. This isn't photoshopped. This is one of our conventional orchards on the right versus one of the regenerative orchards on the left. How do we define regenerative in this case? No tillage, no pesticides, perennial ground cover under the orchard floor, compost teas, and livestock integration. And the conventional orchard is kind of characterized by those typical practices that you see over there. Result. Total soil carbon was increased by 30%. We can also carbon using this approach. Soil health was increased significantly in regenerative orchards. Water infiltration rates, and this is really important in the desert. 6 times faster on the first pour, 22 times faster on the second pour. That's infiltrating water much faster. Okay, this will change California agriculture right there. Things we didn't know was possible. Life on these farms was noticeably increased, 6-fold higher in terms of inverts on the soil. But pest populations were exactly the same. And when we showed this to one of our conventional producers, he looked at the data and he said, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I did everything I was supposed to do. I followed the guidelines from the local university on best management practices and the Almond board and all of that. And I sprayed insecticides 5 times last year. And what you guys are telling me right now is that right across the road, the folks that sprayed nothing at all had the same number of pests. And I can't believe that. But it was true. And the data was able to show that to him in a way that he couldn't understand otherwise. And he's transitioning a 160-acre block of his orchard over to regenerative now. And that's the power of science. That's the need of science. There was no difference in almond yields. Profit was twice as high, just exactly what happened in the cornfield. Questions about this? Thoughts, concerns?
I'm curious, just why is there, like, what is it about that crop that is like, that they require it or they think they have to require it to be completely devoid of life? And, you know, it literally looks like desolate ground. There's nothing there except the almond tree. Is there a reason why they feel that is the only way to do it with a conventional?
Well, yeah, what a great question. I mean, this is true in many of our systems nowadays. Most of our cropland is kind of devoid of life. We may have closer row spacings than row crops, but which makes it a little more apparent than the almond orchards.
That's a good point.
Why?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, we hear these arguments quite a bit. If you use cover crops, it might rob water from your trees, might foster pest populations, might change the microclimate that leads to frost damage on the trees. It would impede harvesting if they leave ground cover. And what it ends up taking is somebody that's bold enough to do something and try it. And then suddenly you realize that all of those preconceptions were false. All right. Why isn't regen? So we've got data. We got data from 2 systems. We're getting more data as we speak. Every year it's rolling in. Why is it this mainstream? It makes so much sense. Well, I think in part because change is hard, right? And we kind of get stuck in our ways. But also, I think on this issue, science has been tainted on this, or at least misdirected, perhaps is a better word of saying it. Right, I was a scientist. I worked for USDA prior to starting ECDYSIS Foundation about 5 or 6 years ago, which is kind of grassroots research. I was with USDA as one of the top young scientists in the country. Got to meet Obama in the White House. And I was doing everything right. I had scads of students and postdocs, publications. I had 100 or more peer-reviewed papers. I wrote a book by the age of 30. Grants, millions in grant money. I was attaining all of those goals that scientists are supposed to be. And then I met these jerks. And what these guys said to me was, you can tell me, or the pesticides are killing our bees. And I said, well, you know, the science isn't real clear on that. It's gray, it isn't black and white. And they said, come on out, watch my bees die right in front of the hives. And then you tell me that the data isn't conclusive. And I did that and they were right. We were asking the wrong questions with our science. we were disconnected from the problems that we were trying to solve. And when I started to do the science that validated what these folks were experiencing, things started to change for me within the industry. Science was starting to become suppressed. I was suddenly working in a politically very tenuous situation, and my ability to walk into Washington and have doors open was suddenly stopped. And that was a really strange thing to have happen to me. Didn't make sense. And then finally they said, you have to take this paper about corn production and how over-investing in corn may actually be a national security threat. You have to take your name off of that paper. And at that point, that's scientific suppression. That's taking science out of the dialogue. I'm not against corn, but over-investing in anything makes the food system very brittle. And that's not a good situation to be in. I don't think I think it's okay for us to point that out. So I quit. You know, I mean, I had to think of this question: why am I here? Why did I get into this whole idea of science and agriculture? And the reason that I came up with is that this planet is facing some serious threats right now, some serious problems. Climates are changing, desertification of formerly fertile lands, pollution, species loss. We hear about, you know, the fact that topsoil will be gone in 54 years. What we often forget is that this current extinction rate, we're losing 10% of species per decade. At the time we run out of topsoil, we'll be out of life on Earth. So I think that the reason I'm here is to help that. And at least I want to devote what skills I have in order to doing that. And so I quit. I quit noisy. Front page of the Washington Post. The result was that 200 other scientists came forward and said that and within the USDA, and said that their science also had been suppressed for political reasons. And that is not okay. Has anything changed? I don't know. It has for me. I've been able to have more of an impact now than I could have even dreamed of within the USDA system. Regenerative agriculture can't move forward without rethinking science. Yellow is corn, green is soybeans. Science is what produced this. Okay. And it's going to take scientists to look at the landscape here within the Midwest and around the country and say, you know what, what's happened here is morally and ethically wrong, and we need to use our resources in order to help change that. That this is the battleground. This is where we need to make changes. And when we do that, we can also make farms more resilient. So I'm not anti-farmer. In fact, I am one. I just want to keep more money in farmers' pockets. Why does regenerative agriculture need science? Well, it's to increase adoption. Right now, it's to validate what's being done, right? Right now, there's a real push, or, you know, I mean, we see a lot of success stories, right? Individual farms that are farming regeneratively that have been successful. And it's so easy for critics to say, you know what, that may work there, but it'll never work on my farm. It's too wet, too dry, too hot, too cold. Can't work here. And what we can do is, using science, we can validate and say, these are not just anecdotal success stories. When you go this route, it always works. And you can expect to see these benefits to your soil, to your biodiversity and the life on your farm, to the economics of your situation. It also can be used to provide roadmaps based on what farmers are experiencing in order to help them transition. But first off, we need to very clearly define what regenerative is. There's been quite a few opportunities to do that. I think we have a pretty good idea of what regenerative agriculture is, and we can debate the exact verbiage, but usually these words are in the definition. Soil health, promoting life, growing nutrient-dense food, and profitably and resiliently. Okay. That's great, we need that definition. But it does not help when I go out onto a farm. Is this one regenerative? Okay. And so that's something that's going to need to be an important element of anything that we design going forward. Soil carbon is important. That's an outcome that needs to be measured. Water is an outcome that needs to be measured. The resilience of the farm, price premiums, all of these are affected by regenerative. So to do this, we changed how we do science. I bought a farm. That pole shed there is our research lab. And what we wanted is to kind of use our science to foster a revolution in food. So we want this to be a national network of centers for excellence in regen ag, and we are doing the science in order to try to help that. First off, how are we changing things? Instead of focusing on incremental progress, we are focused on problems, underlying problems, reinventing the system so that we're not just focusing on new symptomatic problems. Science also has to be funded in a different way. And so grant dollars are drying up and there's more and more hands in the pot. When that happens, large research institutions need to depend upon other sources of funds. And the deepest pockets in this game right now are the large corporations, ones that are heavily influenced by the pesticide industry and agrochemical use. But also science and what we're trying to really focus on, we need a new set of success benchmarks, new metrics of success. So as a scientist, how do I know whether I'm good at my job? Well, publish or perish, right? How many peer-reviewed papers you've written? How many grant dollars? Gosh, if you land a grant of a certain size, you're guaranteed a job for life. Graduate students trained, it's a puppy mill. We just pump them out, right? How many people have you pumped through the system? No thinking about what jobs they're going to get afterwards. How many committees have you served on? How involved are you within your scientific community? And I started to look at this. Well, I mean, the only way that you get a job within this field is by adhering to these metrics of success. And so what we're doing is we're driving a wedge here. The scientific community is in a self-perpetuating rut. We can't get out within the current matrix. And I started to look at this list of success benchmarks, and I asked myself, which of these do farmers care about? None of them. None of them. We're speaking a totally different language. We're writing our science for other scientists. The farmers are left out. So the first step in our process in rethinking how science is applied is that scientists have to become part of food communities again. We have to walk the talk. We have to become farmers and beekeepers and ranchers. How many acres do we change? How many relationships have we forged? How much social media interest have we generated? And peer-reviewed science, I think, is an important component of that, but it isn't the first thing on the list, that's for sure. All right. So in order to kind of start working in this field, we started to ask the question about, okay, for Claire's study actually, and for her contemporary Jacob Pachenka, who was working in rangelands, we wanted to work in regenerative versus conventional systems. And to do that, we needed to be able to distinguish the two farms, the two types of farms. And so to do that, we developed a very simple matrix, okay? In cropland, we asked a very simple series of questions. Do they till? Do they use agrochemicals? Do they use cover crops? Do they put compost down? How are they treating their field margins? And are they integrating crops and livestock together? And in rangelands, it got even simpler. We asked them whether they were using any porons on their animals. We asked them what their stocking rate was, how often they moved those animals, and how long they allowed that pasture to rest. There were naming systems that were available that are starting to evolve. There's more of them every day. But they're being generated by people behind a desk without a real sense of what's going on out there. And so, for example, one of these certification systems for regenerative farm is 52 pages long. Question after question. I mean, I'm a farmer myself. I couldn't answer those questions about my own operation. And so we really have to, in science, we have the term parsimony, which means balancing the precision of a model with how well it works to describe the pattern in the data. And what we need is a more parsimonious approach to naming regenerative versus conventional farms. These systems have to be simple, they have to be transparent, they have to transfer among different operations, they have to be scalable at different sizes of operation, and they can't be corrupted. Because when you get too rigid, you end up affecting, or you give opportunities for cheaters to move in. So our scoring systems were very simple. The number of practices is basically down here, the number of regenerative practices. And on the left axis is all of the different responses that regenerative farms are supposed to do. We put actual data behind this. It's really the first time that anybody's done that. This study, I didn't even put it. It's published now, and in the process of a week, I think it went to like the top 1 or 2% in terms of social media impact of all science ever written. So this is really starting to take off, kind of in the right place at the right time. You see, the more regenerative practices you use, the higher your score, the more soil carbon you're sequestering. Soil health goes up, as measured by the Haney test. Rangelands, your pasture quality, the amount of forage that you're producing goes up. Invertebrates, life on these farms ends up increasing. And profitability increases the more regenerative practices you implement, the more money you make. That's a pretty useful system, especially for something that takes literally about 3 minutes to answer. Yes and no questions. So we can make agriculture conducive to life again. We really don't have a choice in the matter. I often get the question of, that all sounds great, John, but what's it going to cost me to change? I love this idea of regenerative, but how much is it going to cost? And I think that's the wrong question. I think the question we need to be asking is, what's it going to cost not to change? It's going to cost you your farm. It'll probably cost you your grandkids. Is it worth it? Now's the time to make some serious changes. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for an amazing group, a team of wonderful people that I get to work with every day that are excited about saving the planet. There we are, ecdysis.bio. That's our 501c3. Please, if you like what you see, this talk cost about $1 million to produce. So we could really use your help. Blue Dasher Farm is our operation. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Please follow us and like us. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Yeah, I think we've got a little bit of time if anybody has any questions or thoughts or concerns.
So I'm curious on the rangeland, what are the actual factors contributing to more of the net profitability than and like on pasture ground when you're seeing those?
Higher stocking rates, reduced input costs. So your land is able to carry more animals. We're just getting our economic analysis done on the rangeland stuff, so we're excited to see how that all pans out. But right now, it's looking really favorable.
I was going to comment on your discussion about the university and the challenges we have with mainstream agriculture research. I'm with the University of Wisconsin here in Wisconsin, and with a project called Grassland 2.0, which has some similar goals to what your goals are. And I guess I've seen, having worked with the university for most of my career, I've seen a lot of the challenges that you listed out. But one of the things that I just wanted to kind of disagree on a little bit is the training of graduate students and the role that they can play in changing our culture and our society. UW has a graduate program called the agroecology, which really, I think it's really kind of groundbreaking. The progress is slow, but it involves an ecosystems approach, multidisciplinary among the sciences, and they also require them to have a social science element in their training program. So they have to survey farmers, and they have to go out and interact with the public. And I've seen over the last 15 or 20 years, these students come out and take roles in extension and other places where they can have an impact with their ecological thinking. So I guess I would just say that, we need people like you who get tired of the system and go out and reinvent agricultural research. And we also need people within the system to kind of nudge it in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I have 3 master's students and a doctoral student right now at different universities that we're training through our program and providing jobs to them afterwards. So I'm a big supporter of systems level thinking, and I am familiar with UW's agroecology program that's really avant-garde. So kudos to you guys. And also, there's a role for the federal system and the university systems to play in this revolution that we're experiencing. But there are some serious hurdles, and oftentimes change doesn't come from large bureaucracies and so there's a role to be played. The partnerships are going to be a key there, and it'll be great.
Yeah. And I was also going to comment on the just the the hurdle I see us having is that the scientific method is kind of reductionist in its by nature, and it's created a system of siloed disciplines where we can't look at integrated systems across, ecologically speaking. And I think the wildlife biologists and ecologists out there have figured out statistical methods to do some of this stuff. And as those methods are brought into agriculture, I think it can build a way to both be scientifically sound and to accept and understand the innovation that farmers are doing on their own farms.
Yeah, most of the students that we end up because our staff is probably going to increase to about 30, 35 this year, and most of the people that we end up hiring are from the conservation fields and wildlife biology and applied sciences like that. They're kind of getting that systems perspective, but also, thinking about conservation from a very practical standpoint. And I think
Yeah.
that that's really important. You have to understand the fundamentals that drive a system, but you also have to understand how to get stuff done.
Right. Good point.
Yeah. And that's something, so becoming a farmer, that was one of the central problems, right? I mean, I can go out there, okay, there's a problem on my farm. I don't know, maybe there's, weeds here or something like this, or there's the sheep are getting out, and it's like, all right, as a scientist, okay, how do I solve this problem? Or how often to move the sheep? Well, I think what we would need to do is we would need to, establish, replicate this. So maybe divide the herd flock into a couple of different flocks, and then we'll move them at different rates, and we'll measure all of this stuff. And then as a farmer, I'm like, you know what? I got 18 other things I'm supposed to be doing right now. Move the damn sheep.
Yes. I have one solution that will work, so I don't need to look
Yeah.
at the other solutions.
That's right. And that may not be optimal, but it is very practical, isn't it? And scientists need to appreciate that a lot more than what we're trained to.
Yeah.
There's a real functional aspect to this where we just don't have time. There's a real sense of urgency right now that we need to employ in order to get this, save this planet of ours.
I'm curious, thanks for that presentation. That was all really interesting. I'm curious if you have thoughts on the movements towards trying to quantify and compensate farmers for ecosystem services. I know there's growing interest looking at some of the work that's been done in California with verifying different methodologies to try and quantify some of these things. But I think, a lot of us who will work with farmers or in the more regenerative community have some concerns about, I think, exactly what we're talking about here, which is like segmenting benefits, focusing on carbon and not kind of this holistic suite of both environmental and social benefits that can come from this kind of transition. So curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I agree here. Just one second. Sorry about that. So yeah, I guess the question, so for instance, carbon credits, I mean, the question that I think of is, can we offset all carbon emissions and still destroy the planet? And if the answer is yes, which I think it is, then we're asking the wrong question. And until we realize that this is a systems level response, then there's going to be a lot more cheating than it should be allowed. There's going to be a lot of ways of sequestering carbon or whatever while still being really poor stewards of the land. And so I really like the idea of focusing on regenerative systems, but we need to have a clear definition of that. And so that's why we did what we did. I'm not big into a certification program or anything like that, but there is very practical reasons of why we need to know what a regenerative farm looks like and what it is.
Yeah, did anyone else have any questions? You can unmute yourself or just put it in the chat.
One quick question, Jonathan, that most recent article or paper that you were talking about, is there a best way to access that?
Yeah, let me send it. I'll put it in the chat right now.
Perfect.
Please share it widely. We need this to become a part of the discussion and the dialogue here.
So since this is kind of a networking group, I'm curious, Seth, if you'd be willing to share a little bit about what your organization does.
Sure. Yeah, I'm I'm in farm management, professional farm management, basically property management, but for farmland. So working with landowners and doing representing their interest in different leases and interacting with the farmers on day-to-day decisions and stuff. So I'm East Central Illinois. So
Oh, okay. I grew up in Decatur, so I
okay.
know.
Yeah, I'm
So,
we're in Mahomet. So
so do you incorporate like I would want to call them restrictions, but guidelines or for the renters to manage in a certain way when you do these?
We have there's not so much incorporating things into the lease as much as we like to have a good working relationship with the farmer. And so if, you know, especially with landowners that are minded and supportive of the regenerative movement, it's definitely finding a farmer that's going to go down that route and working with them in the day-to-day decisions that support that as well. I mean, I would say that it's it's a difficult task. I've heard the metaphor of, like, if you have a magnet in your hand and you got another magnet on the desk, you're like trying to pull the magnet away from it's just really slow. You can't get too far ahead of the other magnet, otherwise you just completely lose them and stuff. But no, my wife and I started a market garden just to try and kind of in the same, to to a less scientific and less professional degree than Jonathan, probably with Blue Dasher Farm, but just to try and get more hands-on. And so I'm not trying to tell farmers these ideal scenarios and, you know, make them happen. Got to have,
yeah, it gives you some credibility.
hands-on experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Great. I was just I was curious because I worked with another farmland management group in Iowa called Peoples.
Oh, sure.
And they were, when I was talking to them, they were thinking about kind of going down that route and encouraging or requiring farmers to manage in a certain way that would better reflect the goals of the landowner. And I kind of lost touch with that area, and I was wondering if other groups had taken up that kind of approach.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't say
it
that
looks like you're kind of thinking about it.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that it's on all of our landowners at this point. I'd like it to be, but yeah, it's just a matter of educating, and it's also a little bit risky.
Another place where the baby steps are being taken.
Yeah. No, I would say it's a little bit risky from farm managers' perspective, just to say, you know, you are taking on, there's new practices, and anytime it's new practices, even if it's, you know, long term, it's clear that it's going to work out. It's a challenge in the year-to-year ups and downs of things to work those out in the first few years. So.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but if there aren't any more questions, we could wrap up, or if you have any more questions, we could stay on.
I could talk about this stuff all day, but I bet Jonathan could too, but I don't know if I have any specific questions.
Well,
No?
I'll just say thank you, Jonathan, for your presentation. And I really hope that you guys can, get familiar with Regain. This is the whole way for us all to connect and keep talking about this type of stuff. So, I put all of the links there in the chat, and, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and please visit Regain and, keep this conversation going.